welcome you here to the Middlebury Institute. Tonight we have a panel discussion on the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We would like to thank the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and the James Marshall Center for Non-Proliferation Studies for the use of the Irvine Auditorium for this panel discussion. With special thanks to Masako Toki, Education Project Manager of the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. We'd also like to thank the co-sponsors for tonight's program, the Monterey Peace and Justice Center, the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, UNA USA Monterey Bay Chapter, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Monterey County Branch. I'd like to note that the Costa Rican United Nations Ambassador Elaine White Gomez, who served as the president of the UN conference that negotiated the nuclear weapons ban treaty this year, graduated from the Middlebury, then the Monterey Institute of International Studies in 1993 with an MA in International Policy Studies. So you guys have a pretty powerful going university here. You'd be very proud. Tonight's panel discussion is truly timely. In light of what is happening regarding our nation's foreign policy and actions concerning North Korea and Iran, and the plans being made by this administration to upgrade and modernize our nuclear weapons program. And it's especially timely in light of the announcement by the Norwegian Nobel Committee on October 6th that the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, was the recipient of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. In other words, given to an organization rather than a person. The award, yes, amazing, right? Wonderful. The award is in honor of ICANN's efforts to advance the negotiations that led to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, adopted on July 7, 2017 at the United Nations. ICANN is a Geneva-based coalition of disarmament activists from 100 nations around the world. A press release from the Norwegian Nobel Committee states, "The organization is receiving the award for its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons." Tonight's program will last roughly an hour and will be followed by a question and answer period. At 8:45, there will be a reception in the atrium, an opportunity to further discuss the subjects raised by panelists and engage in informal social networking. The moderator for tonight's program, who will introduce the four speakers, is Larry Levine. Larry has been a community organizer and leader of community groups for all of his adult life. He was an early Peace Corps volunteer in Brazil and led a civil rights and anti-poverty program in the rural south of the U.S. Here on the Monterey Peninsula, he has been the president or board member of a variety of community service and world affairs organizations, a couple of which I had the honor to serve with him. He is most known for serving 14 years as the volunteer president of our local United Nations Association chapter, during which time, but get this now, during which time it launched UNA's International Documentary Film Festival, sponsored demining in Bosnia and Afghanistan, and became the largest UNA chapter in the country with over 800 members. Yeah, that's our little UNA chapter here, led by this man. During this time, he also served on the UNA USA National Board and as National Chair for 4 years. Larry received degrees from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton and the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Larry Levine.
And thanks to you, my friend, Phil Butler. And good evening and welcome, everyone. I must say that I consider myself quite a news junkie and pretty well informed about international events. However, when I was first invited to serve as moderator this evening, I was not even aware of this brand new convention. I quickly did some research of my own. Some of you may be in the same situation, and I expect there will be a lot of new learning here this evening. This evening, as you can see, we will have 4 panelists, diverse people with diverse backgrounds and from somewhat diverse generations, who will each have roughly 15 minutes for their comments. And as Phil said, following the speakers, there'll be a question and answer period using the 2 microphones that are in the aisles. And following that, at about 8:45, there will be a reception upstairs in the lobby and an opportunity for you to talk informally with the speakers and with each other and to share in some refreshments. As I said, our 4 speakers come from very different backgrounds, although they all share the same concern about the great dangers of nuclear weapons. And what I'm going to do now is introduce all 4 of them at the beginning, and then we can move smoothly from one speaker to the other. So these are the introductions, and they're in order from on my left here. First is Jackie Cabasso, who has been involved in nuclear disarmament, peace, environmental, and social justice advocacy at the local, national, and international levels for 35 years. She has served as executive director of Western States Legal Foundation based in Oakland since 1984. A leading voice for nuclear abolition, she was a, quote, founding mother of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons in 1995. Since 2007, she has served as the North American coordinator for Mayors for Peace. She currently serves as the national co-convener for United for Peace and Justice. She is also a contributing author to a collection of papers entitled Rethinking General and Complete Disarmament in the 21st Century, published by the United Nations in October of 2016, just a year ago. She received the International Peace Bureau's 2008 Sean McBride Peace Award and the Agape Foundation's 2009 Enduring Visionary Prize, and I'll bet a bunch of other awards also. Next to Jackie is Leslie Kucharski, I hope I got that right, a graduate student in the master's program in nonproliferation and terrorism studies here at the Middlebury Institute for International Studies in Monterey. From January to July of this year, 2017, she worked as an intern for the Weapons of Mass Destruction branch of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs in New York, where she provided substantive support for the Preparatory Committee for the 2020 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference, as well as the UN conference to negotiate the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. Her main area of interest is U.S.-Russian cooperation in arms control and nonproliferation. I tell you, if you're interested in international affairs and you're here in Monterey, you become very familiar with how to pronounce the word non-proliferation. Our third speaker will be Ms. Masako Toki, who is a project manager and research associate at the Nonproliferation Education Program at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies here at MIIS. She coordinates several disarmament and nonproliferation education projects for youth, including the Critical Issues Forum for high school students and teachers from around the world. Her research interests include Japan's nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation policy. She graduated from this institute with an MA in International Policy Studies and an emphasis on nonproliferation studies. She is originally from Japan, and she is also a member of the Japan Association of Disarmament Studies and the U.S.-Japan Leadership Program of the U.S.-Japan Foundation. And finally, our fourth speaker, Sarah Bitter, is a senior at Pacific Grove High School and is in her third year participating in the Critical Issues Forum that Masako leads. For the past 2 years, she has served as a youth communicator for A World Without Nuclear Weapons and has researched nuclear weapons, nonproliferation, and disarmament issues in her preparation for the Critical Issues Forum conference, for which she traveled to Japan this past spring. The conference was held in Nagasaki. There she presented her school team's research project on the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. In her high school career, she has participated in Pacific Grove High School's mock trial team, which has won second place at the annual county competition for 3 years, serving in various roles, including as witness and attorney. She is motivated by her love of logic and the simple thought of making the world a better place. So you can see we have 4 outstanding and diverse speakers, and I will now pass the baton from one to the other. So our first speaker will be Jackie Cabasso, who will be providing information about the process of negotiating the treaty and the ratification process, as well as the role the ban treaty can play in stigmatizing and delegitimizing nuclear deterrence. Jackie.
Thank you very much. Not that one? No. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again. And you've given me a big subject in a few minutes, so I'm going to try to be expeditious, but I may run a few minutes over. So we're having this discussion at an auspicious moment because, as the first speaker said, the Nobel Prize Committee awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons for its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons. But equally important, the Nobel Committee said, "We live in a world where the risk of nuclear weapons being used is greater than it has been for a long time. Some states are modernizing their nuclear arsenals, and there is a real danger that more countries will try to procure nuclear weapons, as exemplified by North Korea. Nuclear weapons pose a constant threat to humanity and all life on Earth. Through binding international agreements, the international community has previously adopted prohibitions against landmines, cluster munitions, and biological and chemical weapons. Nuclear weapons are even more destructive, but have not yet been made the object of a similar legal prohibition." In its own statement, ICANN said, "This prize is a tribute to the tireless efforts of many millions of campaigners and concerned citizens worldwide who, ever since the dawn of the atomic age, have loudly protested nuclear weapons, insisting that they can serve no legitimate purpose and must be forever banished from the face of the earth. It is a tribute also to the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the hibakusha, and victims of nuclear test explosions around the world, whose searing testimonies and unstinting advocacy were instrumental in securing this landmark agreement." But again, ICANN noted, "This is a time of great global tension when fiery rhetoric could all too easily lead us inexorably to unspeakable horror. The specter of nuclear conflict looms large once more. If ever there were a moment for nations to declare their unequivocal opposition to nuclear weapons, that moment is now." So I want to, rather than just take ICANN as some recent phenomena, I want to just kind of go through some of the developments over the years that have led to this moment, some of the things that those millions of people and many governments have contributed to. I'm only going to start in 1970. We could go back to 1945. So in 1970, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty entered into force. In the briefest possible explanation, the NPT was a deal, a bargain that was struck between the original 3 nuclear-armed states, the US, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, and the rest of the world, because the existing nuclear-armed states feared that more and more countries were going to get nuclear weapons. So they pledged to get rid of their nuclear weapons. In Article 6, each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. That's what they pledged. The states that didn't have nuclear weapons pledged not to acquire them. And unfortunately, the nuclear armed states also promised to give the non-nuclear armed states an inalienable right to and assistance with peaceful nuclear technology. Of course, that's the foundation of nuclear power. And interesting to note that Iran was the first non-nuclear country to join the NPT. Under the original terms of the treaty, 2 other countries were allowed to come in as nuclear-armed states. That was France and China. Then the door was closed behind them. Ultimately, almost every country in the world joined as a non-nuclear weapon state. India and Pakistan refused to join because they felt the treaty was discriminatory. North Korea, which was a member, withdrew in 2003, and Israel never joined the treaty. So what we have now is every country in the world is a member of the NPT. All but 5 of them have renounced nuclear weapons, are prohibited from having nuclear weapons. The other 5 have pledged to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons in good faith. And India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea stand outside the treaty. In 1995, the NPT was extended indefinitely with a new round of commitments by the nuclear-armed states for a series of measures to achieve nuclear disarmament. In 1996, after a major international civil society campaign called the World Court Project, the International Court of Justice ruled on the legality of nuclear weapons, and they found the use of nuclear weapons would be generally incompatible with existing international law, but they also found unanimously that there exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control. So that's the highest, most authoritative court in the world, giving its legal interpretation of Article 6 of the NPT. In 1995 also, when the NPT was being extended, non-governmental organizations, NGOs from all over the world were at the United Nations advocating for disarmament, and a large group came together and formed the Abolition 2000 Global Network to eliminate nuclear weapons. And in its founding statement, it says, "We call upon all states, particularly the nuclear weapon states, to take the following steps to achieve nuclear weapons abolition. We further urge the states parties to the NPT to demand binding commitments by the declared nuclear weapon states to implement these measures." And number 1, first measure, initiate immediately and conclude negotiations on a nuclear weapons abolition convention that requires the phased elimination of all nuclear weapons within a time-bound framework with provisions for effective verification and enforcement. Abolition 2000 eventually grew to include over 2,000 NGOs in over 190 countries. And the following year, or actually 1997, working with international lawyers, scientists, and activists, produced a model nuclear weapons convention. That is a model treaty to encourage the governments to do something like that. It was accepted by Kofi Annan, who at the time the UN Secretary General, as an official UN document, translated into all the UN languages and circulated as a deliberative document. In 2007, the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention was updated and again accepted as a UN document. I should mention that actually over the years there have been numerous United Nations General Assembly resolutions calling for disarmament, including the very first resolution in 1946. Now, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons actually came out of Abolition 2000. It was founded in 2007 by IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, to campaign for the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention. And in 2013, it changed its campaign focus to an Ottawa-type process approach, focusing on humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, as opposed to try to change the discourse from the security discourse, which the dominant nuclear weapon states were using. Very important along these lines was that in 2011, after years of being suppressed by the United States, the International Committee of the Red Cross finally came out strongly for nuclear abolition. I do note that the U.S. Red Cross is still not on board. There were several United Nations open-ended working groups that were mandated by General Assembly resolutions to develop steps for nuclear disarmament. And out of all this process came 3 humanitarian consequences conferences held in Oslo in March 2013, in Nayarit, Mexico in February 2014, in Vienna in December of 2014. These were international conferences hosted by the 3 governments to look at the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And out of the 2014 Vienna conference came the Humanitarian Pledge, and I'm just going to read 3 paragraphs or so that kind of sum up the findings of the 3 conferences. Mindful of the unacceptable harm that victims of nuclear weapons explosions and nuclear testing have experienced, and recognizing that the rights and needs of victims have not yet been adequately addressed, emphasizing that the scope of consequences of a nuclear weapons explosion and risks associated raise profound moral and ethical questions that go beyond debates about the legality of nuclear weapons. Mindful that no national or international response capacity exists that would adequately respond to the human suffering and humanitarian harm that would result from a nuclear weapon explosion in a populated area, and that such capacity likely will never exist, we call on all states parties to the NPT to renew their commitment to the urgent and full implementation of existing obligations under Article 6, and to this end to identify and pursue effective measures to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. And we pledge to cooperate with all stakeholders to achieve this goal. We pledge to cooperate with all relevant stakeholders, states, international organizations, the International Red Cross and the Red Crescent movements, parliamentarians and civil society, in efforts to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons in light of their unacceptable humanitarian consequences and associated risks. 127 countries have signed that pledge, and the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution in December of 2016 mandating negotiations in 2017 on a treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. There were 2 sessions of those negotiations. Civil society NGOs were invited to participate at a level that we've not experienced before in disarmament, or there aren't any disarmament fora, really, in nuclear weapons fora in the United Nations. And I think the civil society actually did influence the outcome of the treaty. On July 7th, the treaty was adopted by a vote of 122 to 1, the 1 being the Netherlands, and 1 abstention, Singapore. It's important to note that all of the nuclear weapon states boycotted the negotiations, and all but 1 U.S. nuclear ally boycotted. So that included Japan, Australia, South Korea, and all but 1 of the 28 NATO members. All of these countries have arrangements with the United States that the United States will defend them with nuclear weapons. So they're all under the U.S. nuclear umbrella. So what does the treaty include? The Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty prohibits the development, testing, possession, and use and threatened use of nuclear weapons, and also bars assistance in any way with prohibited acts. It also requires states parties in a position to do so to assist affected states with assistance to victims of nuclear testing and use, and with environmental remediation of contaminated areas. And it provides 2 pathways for nuclear-armed states to verifiably and irreversibly dismantle their nuclear arsenals prior to joining the treaty or after doing so. The treaty also generally provides that measures for verified and irreversible elimination of nuclear weapons may be addressed at meetings of state parties. Non-states parties may attend meetings, so other approaches could be created for nuclear-armed states to disarm. Treaty also reaffirms the existing illegality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons under international law, including the United Nations Charter and international humanitarian law. It opened for signature on September 20th. It requires 50 states to sign and ratify the treaty for it to enter into force. So far, 53 states have signed. I think 3 have ratified. So it's expected that it will enter into force within the next year or 2. But something that's very, very important to realize and for us to get our heads around is that it only applies to the states who sign and ratify the treaty. And all of those states probably are already members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty who have forsworn nuclear weapons. And many of them are also parties to nuclear weapon-free zones. So they've already banned themselves twice, and this is the 3rd time they're banning themselves. So I'm throwing that in a slightly provocative way because I want to just sort of go into what some of the challenges are. I'll just greatly reduce this. So on August 8th, President Trump shocked the world when he warned North Korea that it will be, quote, met with fire and fury and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before, if it does not stop threatening the United States. Now, I was in Nagasaki, where it was August 9th, the 72nd anniversary of the U.S. atomic bombing of the city. And Trump's threat was the top news story. And it was an expression of nuclear deterrence in its crudest and most naked form. On December 22nd, 2016, President-elect Trump tweeted, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." Now, on July 7th, I was at the United Nations to witness the adoption by the majority of the world's countries of the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, which prohibits, again, the possession, development, testing, use, and threat of use of nuclear weapons. The vote by 122 to 1, as I mentioned, unambiguously demonstrates that most of the world has indeed come to its senses regarding nuclear weapons. But, as noted by both the Nobel Prize Committee and ICANN, we stand at a nuclear crossroads with a sharply divided world. While the ban treaty represents the total repudiation of nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence by most of the states that don't possess or rely on nuclear weapons, in a joint statement following the vote, the U.S., France, and the United Kingdom declared, quote, "We do not intend to sign, ratify, or ever become parties to the treaty." Derek Johnson, the executive director of Global Zero, has assessed today's nuclear threat as an unprecedented moment in human history. The world has never faced so many nuclear flashpoints simultaneously, from NATO-Russia tensions to the Korean Peninsula to South Asia and the South China Sea and Taiwan. All of the nuclear-armed states are tangled up in conflicts and crises that could catastrophically escalate at any moment. As former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev warned, it all looks as if the world is preparing for war. More troops, tanks, and armored personnel carriers are being brought to Europe. NATO and Russian forces and weapons that used to be deployed at a distance are now placed closer to each other as if to shoot point blank. While the ban treaty negotiations were taking place in the United Nations, 2 floors up in the same building, in an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, the United States was threatening military action against North Korea in response to its July 4th missile test. So we must keep both realities, the promise of the ban treaty and growing dangers of nuclear war, fully in mind as we develop strategies to accomplish the urgent goal of a world without nuclear weapons. How am I time-wise?
Just over.
Okay, so I won't go into a lot of things I was going to say, but I do want to say this, that the ban treaty's unambiguous prohibition of threat of use is an essential point for the peace movement and civil society in the nuclear-armed and nuclear-dependent states to highlight in our public education and advocacy. The ideology of nuclear deterrence must be delegitimized and stigmatized to make progress on abolishing nuclear weapons, and our task is to change the discourse from the bottom up. And this, I think, is the most important thing we can do. As we've seen with ICANN leading the effort to change the discourse from nuclear, national security to humanitarian consequences. But changing the discourse will require the courage not only to speak truth to power, but also to speak truth to each other. To build the necessary political will in the nuclear-armed and nuclear-dependent states, we will need to move public opinion from the irrational, fear-based ideology of deterrence to the rational fear of an eventual nuclear weapons use, whether by accident or design, by some nuclear-armed state that places its own survival above the survival of its own people. We will also need to stimulate a rational hope that security can be redefined in humanitarian and ecologically sustainable terms that will lead to the elimination of nuclear weapons and dramatic demilitarization, freeing up tremendous resources desperately needed to address universal needs, universal human needs, and protect the environment. And I'll stop there, and hopefully there'll be some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. You can see that over 35 years, she's developed a whole lot more to say. Our next speaker is Leslie Kucharski. As I mentioned before, she is now in her final semester of the MA program in Nonproliferation and Terrorism Studies here at the Middlebury Institute at Monterey. And she will talk about her experiences while interning at the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs earlier this year while this treaty was being developed and related topics. Leslie.
All right, thank you. Is this on? You can hear me? Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. The ban treaty and the movement that led to it is something that I've been studying here at MIIS. And thanks to the Institute and its connections, I had the privilege of, as has been said, working at the United Nations while the treaty was being negotiated. Oh, you can't hear? Okay, sorry. So since I worked for the UN, is that good now? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay. So yeah, since I worked for the UN, I should start with a short disclaimer. My views do not necessarily represent those of the UN. I'm just sharing my own personal thoughts, based on my studies and experience. That being said, I think it's safe to say that the treaty is fully compatible with the principles of the United Nations. From the very foundation of the UN, disarmament, including nuclear disarmament, has been one of the primary objectives of the institution. And as Jacqueline mentioned, this was seen in the first resolution adopted by the General Assembly at its first session 72 years ago about establishing, a commission to deal with the problems related to atomic energy. And the commission was tasked with, among other things, making specific proposals for the elimination of nuclear weapons from national armaments. So despite that, the history of nuclear proliferation, non-proliferation, and disarmament reveals that member states comprising the UN, while agreeing on the objective of nuclear disarmament, disagree on how and under which circumstances to go about achieving it. So I'd like to use my allotted time to speak about the ban treaty in the context of the larger debate regarding the approach to disarmament. In order to better understand the movement behind the ban treaty, I think it's useful to understand the arguments of the not insignificant number of states that are resisting it. So, as my colleague mentioned, 122 states, voted for the treaty, and that there are 193 member states of the UN. So, 193 minus 122, that's a pretty significant number. So one thing I've noticed, particularly during my time at the UN, is that there's a growing tendency for states and people on both sides of the divide to talk at each other rather than with each other in a constructive manner towards, a mutually beneficial compromise. This was illustrated by one roundtable discussion I attended at the UN. This was before the second session of the conference for the ban treaty. It had members of civil society and representatives of government, some of which possess nuclear weapons. I was surprised and kind of depressed at the high level of boredom I experienced at the event. I mean, how can you really be bored when listening to leading civil society advocates including the head of ICANN, which, as we've mentioned, just won the Nobel Peace Prize, and representatives from nuclear weapon states. You know, they're debating nuclear weapons face to face in an unofficial setting. Like, that should be very exciting, right? But the event, it turns out, like, reflecting, it wasn't really depressing. I mean, it was depressing, not surprising. And this is because they were really talking at each other, like over each other's heads. They weren't really engaging each other. So if all states share the objective of nuclear disarmament, why do some reject the ban treaty? And why won't the opposing sides have a fruitful dialogue? To shed light on this, paradox, I think it's useful to look back at the history and understand the historical and political context of the treaty. So, as has been said already, the divide has its origins in another treaty related to nuclear weapons. That's the NPT. It opened for signature in 1968, and it's the legal foundation of all efforts related to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, as well as peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And according to the treaty, 5 states are legally permitted to possess nuclear weapons, while all other states are not allowed to have them. So these two provisions make the treaty inherently unequal. And states participating in the negotiations understood that, so some led a successful effort to create the other provision, which forces the 5 nuclear weapon states to eliminate their arsenals. And as a result, the treaty permits 5 states to legally possess them on the condition that they eventually eliminate them. And this condition was kind of ambiguously worded, and it's really become the root of the divide of these two camps. And so you fast forward 49 years to 2017, and briefly assessing the implementation of the NPT, you can see that the many states who gave up their right to pursue nuclear weapons, they're arguing that the 5 states who have them are not keeping up their end of the bargain. They all still possess nuclear weapons, and on top of that, 4 other states who are not party to that treaty anyway they've acquired nuclear weapons. So that's just like something's not working. That's the idea behind the movement. So it's kind of an expression of dissatisfaction with the lack of progress in the old framework, the old treaty. In the ban treaty, as Jacqueline mentioned, it eliminates the hierarchy created by the NPT by making the possession by any state illegal. So, our notions of fairness and equality really applaud this development. But doesn't mean that the states who oppose the ban treaty want to possess nuclear weapons indefinitely. With that question in mind, we can move to that side of the debate. So states possessing nuclear weapons and their allies emphasize that nuclear weapon states have and continue to decrease the size of their arsenals. For example, the size of the US and Russian arsenals has decreased by thousands since the peak of the Cold War. And that's really significant and tangible progress towards nuclear disarmament. And this happened and continues to happen within the framework of the old NPT treaty. And opponents of the ban treaty don't see the point in creating a separate platform for nuclear disarmament through the ban treaty, because one already exists. And they also emphasize, especially now, in light of recent advancements in North Korea's nuclear weapons program, that it would not be in their security interests or the security interests of their allies to accelerate the rate of nuclear disarmament. So this is a complicated argument. One aspect of it is that it doesn't make sense for them to disarm when other states, like North Korea, are not committed to the same obligation. Would the US like to give up its nuclear weapons and have North Korea be the one calling the shots? So knowing a little bit about the context of the divide, we can turn to the other question, why did the two sides just talk at each other? And to me, this is the key. The answer lies in the different conceptions of security. So the states, advocating the ban treaty think of security mostly in terms of like human security, like collective, like we are all together. You know, they emphasize the disastrous, gendered, humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, whether intentionally or by accident. You know, these effects are indifferent to borders and generations. So space and time, they transcend all of that. And because of that, the advocates argue that nuclear weapons are morally wrong and should be illegal. But you know, this is not to say that those who are against the ban treaty deny the humanitarian consequences. I don't think that's fair. But instead they choose to emphasize security in different terms, not on the level of, you know, collective all, but on the level of states. And according to international law, states have the right to protect themselves. And some states exercise that right with nuclear weapons, legally, at least 5 in accordance with the NPT. That's debatable though. I can sense that right here. That's at least the argument. So, and they, you know, until they feel that nuclear weapons no longer benefit their security interests, then they will retain them. So disarmament for them is a long-term and gradual process. So you can't just do it overnight. You can't just ban nuclear weapons and then all of a sudden there are none. So the discussion of state security is one that the ban advocates are really tired of hearing. You know, so they want to reframe the conventional understanding of security and nuclear disarmament. So I guess to conclude, like, if progress towards nuclear disarmament is to continue, so I think generally we should recognize that the process has already begun. We can debate how, you know, should it be happening quicker or not. So if this process is to continue, then each side really needs to work to understand the both conceptions of security, and, you know, try to make a bridge between them. So the policy of talking at one another is not sustainable or conducive to forward progress. You know, it just kind of alienates the other side to the point where they don't want to engage with each other. And how are you going to move forward if you're not talking to each other? So I think it just really exacerbates the division. I think that's a good handoff to Masako, who will talk about education. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie. And maybe there'll be some questions for Leslie later on. So our third panelist will be Masako Toki, who is the Education Project Manager at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies. And she will discuss the role of civil society, especially the Hibakusha, atomic bomb survivors, and Japan's policy toward the ban treaty. She will also talk about the importance of youth education on nuclear disarmament, using an example of the CNS Education Project for high school students, the Critical Issue Forums. Masako.
Thank you very much for attending today's event, and also thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my views on the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons ban treaty. I just wanted to add a little bit of a disclaimer that this is purely my personal views and do not necessarily reflect those of the organization to which I belong. So in my talk, I would like to focus on the important role of civil society and especially on the role of Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. I also want to touch upon the Japanese government's policy and attitude toward the nuclear ban treaty, which is significant since Japan remained the only country that has experienced the wartime nuclear devastation while being protected by the US nuclear umbrella. Finally, I want to talk about the role of youth education, particularly the project that I am currently coordinating, the Critical Issues Forum, which is centered on disarmament and non-proliferation education for high school students. Also, as for the Critical Issues Forum, I placed a couple of dozens of this flyer at the registration area. So if you are interested in, Please feel free to take one copy. So I would like to add my voice to congratulate the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, for receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. I have actually a few friends at ICAN, so I'm particularly very happy for them. The Norwegian Nobel Committee pointed out ICAN has worked so hard to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and made groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons. So of course, as you know, ICAN is a non-governmental organization and a member of our civil society. So United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres commended the role of civil society in his statement at the signing ceremony for the ban treaty on September 20th. He stated, "Civil society played a vital role in bringing the treaty to fruition. The heroic survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the hibakusha, continue to remind us of the devastating humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons." ICAN Executive Director Beatrice Finn also connected the role of the hibakusha to the ICAN's disarmament efforts as follows. "The Nobel Peace Prize is not only for the ICAN, but also for the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is their prize as well. Hibakusha have been a part of this campaign from the beginning, and they are the ones who brought the humanitarian consequences message already in 1945. Hiroshima bombing survivor Setsuko Thurlow has been a great spokesperson who contributed to the cause of ICAN. Setsuko shared her stories so many times. Sometimes for hibakusha it's quite traumatic to talk about their own experiences, but he was so brave and shared her experience many times all around the world. The ban treaty is a great example of the most successful collective efforts by the like-minded governments, civil society, atomic bombing survivors, academia, and scholars. Since the advent of the nuclear weapons and the nuclear age, nuclear weapons policies have been challenged by anti-nuclear weapons movement in civil society. Looking back at non-governmental organization, NGO, participation in nuclear disarmament history, the role of civil society cannot be underestimated. Civil society continues to grow more and more critical, and its voice has become more influential to nuclear weapons policy. Recently, as seen in ICAN, younger generations are working effectively in creative and innovative ways to mobilize civil society. There have been several remarkable achievements by civil society in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, as demonstrated in the history of the Nobel Peace Prize, which has been awarded several civil society groups or individuals for their anti-nuclear weapon work. These civil society groups include the Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs and the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, or IPPNW. And IPPNW later launched ICAN movement. The adoption of the ban treaty on July 7th was a historic and highly emotional moment for all the countries who supported the treaty. Civil society members were jubilant, especially a group of hibakusha who endured unspeakable ordeals of atomic bombing and its after effects. Their only wish is to see world moving toward free of nuclear weapons. Conference President Elaine White Gomez of Costa Rica, among other delegates, commented on the vital role civil society organizations, especially a hibakusha group, have played in the adoption of the treaty. The ICAN Executive Director, Beatrice Finn, asserted that the adoption of this treaty feels like a momentous step forward, even if the nuclear weapons states and most nuclear weapons dependent states have not participated. The moral norm has been declared very clearly with the united will of the world's people behind it. Nuclear weapons in any hands are wrong. So the adoption of this treaty by itself will not make nuclear weapons disappear. Still, I think it is fair to say that banning nuclear weapons is a response to a long-standing aspiration of humanity. Every year, on the day of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6th and 9th, each city issues a peace declaration. This year, both cities' peace declaration clearly supported the ban treaty. The Hiroshima Peace Declaration was read by Hiroshima mayor and illustrated the horror of a single nuclear weapon that killed over 140,000 people. The mayor depicted an absolute evil that was unleashed in the sky over Hiroshima and implored the audience who gathered to the annual memorial ceremony to imagine for a moment what happened under the rolling mushroom cloud. It is important to imagine and try to understand what happened under the mushroom cloud, because that is where you can find the actual effects of the use of nuclear weapons. The shape of a mushroom cloud from the distance that many of us are familiar with is not the actual effect of the use of nuclear weapons. Therefore, it is crucial to listen to atomic bombing survivors' testimonials. Such direct, immediate first-person accounts fill the gap in historical facts of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and help to give a clear understanding of the actual effects of the use of nuclear weapons against human beings. The Hibakusha recollections help to demystify nuclear weapons and remove any euphoria or sanitization about the use of atomic bombs. It is inevitable that one day there will be a world without any Hibakusha to tell us the impact of nuclear weapons, and that time is fast approaching. Currently, the average Hibakusha is over 81 years of age. Consequently, now is the time to teach the next generation about the very real effects of the use of nuclear weapons and how to prevent these weapons from ever being used again. Unfortunately, given the advanced age of most Hibakusha, it is unlikely that a world without nuclear weapons will become reality within their lifetime. However, the successful adoption of the ban treaty and the ICANN's Nobel Peace Prize award must be so encouraging to these Hibakusha. While the states possessing nuclear weapons made it very clear that they will never join the treaty, and the states under the protection of their nuclear umbrella are likely to follow suit, this is an historic event in the nuclear disarmament movement. The ban treaty will help to stigmatize nuclear weapons and by doing so, help to strengthen the norms against their very existence. Once in effect, this treaty would prohibit states from developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, transferring, possessing, stockpiling, using, or threatening to use nuclear weapons. Setsuko Tharo, one of the most vocal Hibakusha, said, "Nuclear weapons have always been immoral. Now they are also illegal," in her closing statement right after the ban treaty was adopted. As many people say, this is the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons, and there is still an enormous task ahead of us. Opponents of the nuclear ban treaty, a group which includes all the nuclear weapon states and allies under their extended nuclear deterrence, have not only boycotted the negotiations but also criticized the treaty for deepening the division between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. The Japanese government, my own country, also argued that efforts to enact a nuclear ban treaty without engaging the nuclear weapons states will only deepen the schism and delay the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Japan's decision not to participate in the negotiations has generated tremendous disappointment, both outside and inside Japan, especially, of course, among the hibakusha. Many believe that since Japan is the only country to have suffered the effects of the use of nuclear bomb in wartime, it has a moral responsibility to lead efforts to create a world without nuclear weapons. The Japanese government surely must have experienced a tremendous dilemma to come to this decision, considering the extremely strong anti-nuclear weapons sentiment among its people. One of the hibakusha who participated in the negotiation said, as a hibakusha and as a Japanese, "I am here today heartbroken, yet I am not discouraged." Japan continues to hope to be a bridge builder for nuclear disarmament, uniting the international community in making progress toward a world free of nuclear weapons. However, by boycotting the ban treaty negotiation entirely, Japan may have undermined its credentials as a disarmament champion and even as a bridge builder. In an effort to continue to champion nuclear disarmament, the Japanese government recently launched a new initiative called the Eminent Persons Group, which sought to encourage dialogue between nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. The group includes people with a wide range of opinions who both support and oppose the ban treaty. However, the current international security environment surrounding nuclear weapons, as we all witness on a daily basis, contribute to an inescapable sense of stagnation in nuclear disarmament on a deeper level. In this sense, it is crucial to provide younger generations with disarmament and non-proliferation education and tools to strive for that goal. The memories of the hibakusha play a vital role in reminding the youth of the urgency of the cause and the devastating consequences if we fail to rein in the nuclear horror. In that area, one of the Japanese government's initiatives, Youth Communicator for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons, which was launched in 2010, is highly praiseworthy. As a strong believer in the power of education for making progress toward nuclear weapons-free world, I have been organizing the Critical Issues Forum, a disarmament education for high school students. So this year, we held a conference in Nagasaki, Japan, to strengthen our determination to assure that Nagasaki would be the last city to experience nuclear devastation. High school students from the United States, including Sarah, and Russia, joined Japanese students in Nagasaki to present and discuss their views on nuclear disarmament. These future leaders learned many important things from the hibakusha of Nagasaki, who shared their experiences of the horror of nuclear weapons and the following unspeakable ordeals. By learning from the hibakusha, young generations in the civil society can effectively work with other stakeholders, including governments, international organizations. The preamble of the ban treaty recognizes the importance of peace and disarmament education in all its aspects and of raising awareness of the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons for current and future generations, and committed to the dissemination of the principles and norms of this treaty. In his monumental speech on disarmament at the Middlebury Institute in 2013, actually in this same auditorium, the former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon eloquently stated that education can also help to refute the claim that nuclear disarmament is utopian. education can help the world to build a global culture of peace that rejects all weapons of mass destruction as illegal and immoral. This is a really powerful statement. The Ban Treaty is controversial, and there are lots of different opinions. But I hope today's discussion will be an opportunity for all of us to think what we can do for peace and security of a world free of nuclear weapons and how we can use education for this goal. Thank you.
Arigato, Masako. Thank you. Our fourth and final speaker will be Sarah Bitter. As I said before, she's a senior at Pacific Grove High School and a participant in this Critical Issues Forum. And she will give us a report on her experience and a student perspective on the issue of nuclear disarmament. Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me enough? Yes? Okay, good. All right, I would like to talk to you about my experience with learning about nuclear weapons, especially through the Critical Issues Forum. So it's sad to say, but when I was a sophomore in high school, that was a couple years ago, I had relatively no knowledge about nuclear weapons. I mean, I had learned about them periodically in my science and history classes, and I'd watched documentaries with my parents and heard people talk about them. But all I really knew was that nuclear weapons were bad. I didn't know any of the details. And I definitely didn't think of nuclear weapons as a thing of the present. Whenever we did talk about nuclear weapons in class, we never actually delved into the details. We never talked about the theories of nuclear weapons and the different opinions. And even when teachers would tell us about how important they were, we never spent enough time on nuclear weapons for that to stick with the students. This all changed, however, in my sophomore year, when I was encouraged to join the Critical Issues Forum. In the Critical Issues Forum, I learned about nuclear weapons, and I looked into the political, environmental, and social aspects of nuclear weapons, as my team and I developed a project for the conference. My first conference was held here in Monterey, and it looked at nuclear vulnerability. I had never thought of nuclear vulnerability before. Whenever I thought of nuclear weapons, I thought of one country using it in war. However, whenever we do have nuclear weapons, I learned, there's always a chance for them to be used accidentally. It was very scary doing the research. We found that the appearance of a bear near a nuclear weapons site almost caused the launching of nuclear weapons. That when a man dropped a bolt inside a nuclear reactor, then a nuclear explosion was almost caused. And how it is very easy in this day and age for nuclear weapons to be deployed, even when they're not meant to be. And then the next year I attended a conference on the CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. At that conference, students from Russia, the United States, and Japan presented plans for ratification for the CTBT. At that conference, I especially learned about the political complexity of nuclear weapons. I learned about many different perspectives, humanitarian and political, about nuclear weapons. It was also very interesting to learn about the scientific perspective, which several schools did touch upon. It was really important at these conferences to learn more about nuclear weapons in depth. I learned more about the theories of deterrence, even the idea that uncertainty in the country's knowledge of how well their nuclear weapons work can lead to more safety, and the differences between developing and developed countries in their nuclear weapons, and whether or not treaties are fair. I've also learned a lot about my learning from nuclear weapons. For example, not everything is common sense in nuclear weapons, and that idea, in fact, is not common sense. Often when we talk about nuclear weapons, or when I talked about nuclear weapons with people in the community, at my school, in my family, I heard ideas that were not based in science and were not well thought out. For example, I'd often hear about how people did not believe in treaties because they would say something like, well, how can you really know if a country has nuclear weapons? We can't expect them to stay true to the treaty. However, at the Critical Issues Forum conference, I learned about verification and all the scientific monitoring that goes behind it. With this knowledge, I know that verification is possible and that trust can be a part of treaties, which can lead to a world without nuclear weapons. In addition, I also learned about the relationship between fear and knowledge. Personally, when I chose not to learn more about nuclear weapons before the Critical Issues Forum because I was afraid. I think that's true for a lot of people. We know that nuclear weapons are out there, but we don't want to learn more because we know how much of a threat they are. And especially when I first learned about nuclear weapons, my fear increased. With the Nuclear Vulnerability Conference especially, I learned how easy it is for nuclear weapons to be deployed. However, as I began to learn more about nuclear weapons, that fear decreased. I learned that there are many, many people out there working for a world without nuclear weapons. I also learned about the scientific processes behind verification. Overall, I think education is very, very important for our youth. And especially through my own story, I realized that education can change opinions and can give people the motivation to work toward a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to all of our panelists. And you did hear different experiences and different perspectives, and once again, different generations. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first question. And while we deal with this one, you can line up at the microphone if you have questions or comments to make. I think it was Leslie, if I'm not mistaken, who said in talking about how the non-participating states and the participating states were not communicating with each other. She said something isn't working. So I would like to posit that there are some things that are working. That in the 1960s, I remember, the projection was that we could have as many as 30 nuclear weapon states by the turn of the century. And in fact, today in 2017, we have 9, some of which have very small numbers of weapons. So that certainly is a lot better than 30. And thank goodness, since 1945, no one has actually used a nuclear weapon in conflict. So that's a good thing too. It seems to me that it's not likely, probably unreasonable, that any major nuclear country is going to eliminate all its weapons unless the other countries do at the same time. The United States would not go non-nuclear if Russia and China continued to have the bomb, and vice versa. So I would like to ask, I'll address this to both Jackie and Leslie, I think, in particular, what needs to be the strategies to change the mood in the populations and more in the governments in the nuclear countries over the years and decades to come?
Guess I can try. Can you hear me? Okay, so strategies for changing. This is a really complicated question, especially at the moment, given the divide. You know, all the nuclear weapon states boycotted the ban treaty. You know, Masako spoke a little bit about the position of Japan, and so recently, the states that are normally building bridges between these two different camps, like Japan traditionally, given it, you know, that it's the only state to be, you know, a victim of an actual attack with a nuclear weapon, they're really forced with the ban treaty negotiations to pick a side, and that is not conducive to forward progress. Because if you're trying to build a bridge, but they're forcing you on either side, you can't really, you know, work in the middle, and that is a huge issue. So maybe Jacqueline can help. Yeah.
So I want to just I thought, Leslie, you did a great job of describing the divide, but I take exception, but it was a little too uncritical, because it seemed to be assuming that the nuclear armed states are in good faith when they talk about their commitment to eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. There is actually no evidence to support that. I didn't have time to mention this, but, well, first of all, let me say that it is true that the numbers of nuclear weapons are greatly reduced, but there are still nearly 15,000 nuclear weapons, over 90% of them held by the US and Russia, and most of them are an order of magnitude more powerful than the US bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Every US president since 1945, when Harry Truman, a Democrat, presided over the bombing of Hiroshima, has reaffirmed the threatened use of nuclear weapons as the cornerstone of US national security policy. And Donald Trump entered office with the US poised to spend at least $1 trillion over the next 30 years to maintain and modernize its nuclear bombs, warheads, and delivery systems, and the infrastructure to sustain them indefinitely. And I would point out that the United States currently, the Department of Defense has plans to build new delivery systems, including a new intercontinental ballistic missile and a new ballistic submarine, to be in use through the 2080s. So that is definitely not showing a good faith commitment to disarmament, and all of the other nuclear states are modernizing their arsenals as well. So we have to understand how incredibly powerful and entrenched the institutions are that arose from the Manhattan Project and that have amassed greater and greater power over the years. And as I said, this has been very consistent through every administration. And last October, President Obama's UN Ambassador Robert Wood condemned the ban treaty in the General Assembly, and this, I think, sums it up. Advocates of a ban treaty say it is open to all, but how can a state that relies on nuclear weapons for its security possibly join a negotiation meant to stigmatize and eliminate them? And when Donald Trump came into office, unfortunately, the keys to this doomsday machine were handed over to him. And as he said to the General Assembly on September 19th, the United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. And then the North Korean foreign minister said, North Korean nuclear forces are a war deterrent for putting an end to a nuclear threat of the US and for preventing its military invasion, and calling Trump mentally deranged. So that's the level of international discourse now. And it's very scary. And I think that there's way too much emphasis on the accidental potential use of nuclear weapons and not nearly enough recognition of the use by unintended, accidental, miscalculation, or intentional, particularly right now. And these threats, by the way, we put out a paper, and I have copies out there, documenting how these threats themselves are illegal, a violation of international law under the UN Charter and international humanitarian law. So it's really hard to know what to do now. Our public has been apathetic for decades. They haven't been keeping abreast of developments. And so now all of a sudden a lot of people are really scared about the US-North Korea conflict, but they're not really tracking the US-Russian conflict, which is almost as serious in terms of potential escalation, and even the US potential conflict with China. So one thing is just education. I heartily endorse education. You all now know about the ban treaty, and you know that our government in the United States boycotted it and is trashing it. There's a piece of legislation, I don't normally advocate for legislation, but there's a piece of legislation introduced in the House by Congressman Liu and in the Senate by Senator Markey, which would require congressional authorization for a first use of nuclear weapons. And I really think that we should be stepping up our support for that. And I want you to know that it was introduced while Obama was still president. So it's recognizing a structural flaw in our system that only one person, and right now we have, well, somebody in adult daycare in the White House who can do that, who has charge of, who has sole authority to launch nuclear weapons. So I think, I just want to say, getting back to the ban treaty, how we can use the ban treaty here is to really embrace the ban treaty's values, the humanitarian values espoused in the ban treaty. And we need to be, and also using it to delegitimize and stigmatize deterrence. Because as long as nuclear armed states are committed to nuclear deterrence, which means the threatened annihilation of their adversary, they're not going to want to give them up. And so we need a paradigm shift. We need a different concept of security. We need to come together with an understanding that nuclear weapons make everybody less secure. They don't make us more secure. And that's a long-term project, but forums like this are a contribution to that.
Great, so we'll move on to audience questions and comments. We have 2 lines already. I think there's a button that you have to turn on the mic if you know how to do that. I'll encourage people to try to make both questions and responses as brief as you can so we can get through many of them. And if you'd like to specifically ask one of the speakers your question or address your comment to them, please do that. Otherwise, we'll see who would like to respond to you. So Peggy, why don't you go first? Is the mic on there?
I think so.
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to mention just that there is an organization that Jackie is involved with, Mayors for Peace, of somewhat large cities around the world. Has 7,000 cities have signed on for this, and it was started by the mayor of Hiroshima, and they're asking for abolishment of nuclear weapons by 2020, which is not soon enough. And I hope everybody here will sign the petition that will be on the table in the foyer. It was provided to us by Tri-Valley Cares, which in Livermore does a wonderful job in working against nuclear weapons. The petition says, do not fund programs that may lead to resumption of nuclear test explosions or new nuclear weapons. And they're calling on the budget office of the Congress, of the US government, to forgo requesting funds for nuclear testing, test readiness, or new weapons that could lead to nuclear testing. And we call on Congress to cut funds for these programs. So everybody who hasn't signed, please do sign this wonderful petition. And there's a photo on the petition that says the Banbury underground nuclear test vented radiation in a cloud that was tracked across multiple states in 1970 at the Nevada test site, and it shows a mushroom cloud. So there's nothing about underground testing that is safe. And I have 3 somewhat questions. I would like to know what the reaction was at the UN, if Leslie or any of you know, to Trump giving basically a pro-war speech at the UN. It's shocking, and I'm wondering if there was tremendous reaction among the UN members about that. And I was here less than a month ago for a speech on climate. This whole auditorium was full. Now, what is the difference? What happened that this auditorium could be full for, of course, climate is extremely important too, but with everybody knowing that we have such a dangerous situation with Trump having his finger on the button, this auditorium should be full. And were classes told they had to come to the climate talk? I don't know.
So let's see if we can get responses to those two questions. The first question was, do any of you know what the response was at the United Nations to President Trump's speech? We don't know the answer to that question.
There was no big reaction that was visible. I think they were just stunned.
I just want to add, in terms of the reaction to Trump's speech, perhaps Japanese Prime Minister Abe is one of the very few national leaders that took quite positively, not really entirely positively, but given the current Japan's security environment, like especially threat from North Korea, I'm not advocating Prime Minister Abe, but at the same time, the fear in Japan, their fearing toward North Korea is really increasing, and this really impacting negatively on Japan's traditional peaceful mindset. So I'm very worried about. So I think, at least from Japan, not the general public, but from the national leader, I believe he was quite happy, not completely happy, but he sounds like he liked Trump's speech. But also, I just wanted to mention the not so many people here, but thank you so much for coming in the evening. I really appreciate you took time to listen to us. And I think this is partially my fault. I don't know, I work at the MIIS, maybe I should have advertised better, but at the same time, this really reminds me the importance of really education, not only at the school, but in general terms. It's so important to talk about this issue with your friends, and not so many people are aware of this issue. So I would like to encourage all of you, that because you are here, this means you have a very, very interest in this issue. So hopefully you go back to your home or school, and then talk to your friends. And perhaps next time when we have this type of event, we will have a full house. So thank you.
I'd like to add a comment to that as well. Not so much about the threat to North Korea. I mean, openly threatening another member state of the United Nations with nuclear weapons is totally unheard of and generally not accepted by anybody at the United Nations. But also, I think an important aspect of his speech was not just about threatening to use nuclear weapons, but the way he spoke about the deal that was made with Iran, about stemming its nuclear weapons program development. And it's been in the news recently. I mean, Trump has condemned the deal, saying it's like the worst deal that's ever made. I think that's the language he used. And saying that on the podium of the General Assembly is it's really not conducive to further progress. And I mean, it could unravel the deal, which was a hallmark of international diplomacy, and it's been hailed by all the nuclear weapon states, like prior to Trump coming into power, as example of how the current regime surrounding nuclear weapons is successful. Disarmament may be slow, but on the other hand, this regime that exists has stemmed the proliferation of nuclear weapons, stopping, as Larry was saying, 30 states from having nuclear weapons, keeping it only down to 4 in addition to the 5 that have nuclear weapons under the NPT. So that definitely was not taken well at the UN, the comment about Iran.
I don't know if any of you would like to specifically address why a program on climate would fill the auditorium and a program on abolishing nuclear weapons would not. I mean, is it just a factor of the times and the immediacy of the issues? Jackie, do you have an idea?
Well, I don't have a good answer, but I have a few observations. For those who were adults or late teens in the early 1980s, you will recall that the anti-nuclear movement was the dominant social movement in the United States and in many other parts of the world. I mean, it was absolutely on the top of everybody's agenda. Why? Because the United States had deployed missiles to Europe, and it was the height of the Cold War, and people were actually terrified that there would be an all-out nuclear war between the US and the Soviet Union. And nobody could have imagined, and there were huge demonstrations. That's when there were 1 million people in Central Park in 1982, June. And there were many, many thousands of people at the Livermore Laboratory on that day in June of 1982. Over 1,500 people arrested for nonviolently blockading the laboratory. And that mass movement continued through the 80s. And then something totally unimaginable happened, which was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And people who, we all were taught to believe that if the Cold War ended, there would be no more justification for nuclear weapons and they would just go away. And so it's almost as if the whole planet breathed a sigh of relief that we'd walked away from nuclear weapon, that we'd escaped a nuclear war. And people went on to, activists went on to other issues, all kinds of things happened, but nuclear weapons just fell off the public radar screen. But for those of us who were monitoring particular facilities like the Livermore Lab, as my group was, what we saw was that they were scrambling for a few years for new justifications for maintaining the nuclear enterprise, and sure enough, they came up with them. Colin Powell, in 1991, I think, said, we no longer have the luxury, when he was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we no longer have the luxury of having a specific enemy to plan for. We have to plan for the possibility of anybody being our enemies. And so the budget declined for a few years, and then it started to climb and climb and climb and climb and climb. So the nuclear weapons budget, the part that's just for the warheads, is now significantly higher, more than double in inflation-adjusted dollars than it was during the height of the Cold War under Ronald Reagan. And this has all happened with the public not paying attention, with the media not doing a good job covering it, although the information is there if you look for it. But I think and so a whole generation has grown up not knowing about it. I think that one young person I talked to said it was like, nuclear weapons are part of the natural world. They're like the furniture in the room, right? And so it's a tough haul, because now I think people are starting to wake up and go, oh my God, what's going on here with U.S. North Korea, with Trump? But it's been going on all along. And so people don't have any context now to understand what's happening. And in the peace movement has become very fragmented and tired. And we're all asking each other, how come we can't mobilize people? And this is the discussion that's going on now nationally in the fragments of the peace and anti-nuclear movements.
And as they say, climate is hot.
But I will say this: the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists it moved the hands of its doomsday clock up to 2.5 minutes to midnight in January, citing the twin existential threats posed by nuclear weapons and climate change. And that's the closest it's been since 1957.
Let's move on to the next question. Is that David? Peggy, tell him where the switch is. It's on the side, isn't it? There you go.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Actually, thank you for the thousands of hours that each of you has spent getting to this point. I've got a little news item, just because no one mentioned it, but recently, I think it was less than a month ago, a Soviet fellow died who'd actually prevented a nuclear war. And there was another fellow, also a Soviet, who died some years ago when there was a mistaken, it looked like the United States had fired some missiles towards the Soviet Union, and this fellow actually decided not to respond. And if he'd passed this information along, we might not be speaking here. That's the little news item. I came up with a little idea while I was listening to everybody and Peggy's question. Here's a model for something that might be of some value to get people re-energized, and that is, in California, we have this campaign to stop smoking, where there's ads on television, they're actually paid by a tax on the tobacco, that show how hideous smoking is. And the ads don't show up every day, and they don't show up every hour, but the combined set of these ads is having a tremendous effect. For those of you who are old enough, older than you, Sarah, the effect of smoking in California is dramatically different in this short lifetimes that we've had. And a constant campaign of ads that show what go on, maybe even something as dramatic as, have you ever seen the cigarette boxes in Canada? They show totally disfigured lungs on the cigarette packages. So it's not just a word warming, it's something that sticks you in the nose. Well, if you all recall, I'm going to add a little bit of gravity to my argument here, and that is, there was an entire presidential campaign that was won and lost on an ad that had to do with a nuclear mushroom cloud.
Did any of you want to respond? There wasn't really a question there. There was a suggestion.
Well, I could respond. That's very interesting, and I think that could, maybe work on the domestic level. But I guess where I would push back on that is, how is that going to make states, the government, really rethink their security strategy? So I think maybe to answer the other question initially posed too, like what can we do to move forward? There are some aspects that are promising. Like one is continuing to develop disarmament verification mechanisms. So it's like, yes, we want to disarm, but this process is inherently going to take a long time. Nuclear weapons are very complicated. You can't just detach the warhead from a missile and throw it away. It's a very long-term process, and so this is something that is still not really developed. But if we can get popular support behind initiatives like funding science related to disarmament verification, that's something that states can work with. And another I guess less popular point of view in the United States, but popular in Russia and China, is that you need to focus on other aspects of disarmament. Like, there are many different types of weapon systems, nuclear just being one aspect of them. And like for Russia and China, they've been pushing now for a long time in the UN progress on banning weapons in space. Like nuclear weapons are banned in space, but conventional weapons aren't. And they say, well, if we just continue to make progress on nuclear disarmament, then the US is going to have a huge advantage over us. So it's more of a comprehensive process, and you often hear the term like complete and general disarmament. So that refers to not just nuclear disarmament, but disarmament in other fields. And that's something, if you want to see progress in the nuclear realm, you have to make progress in the other realms as well. So you can level the playing field in a way that's going to make other states like Russia and China get on board.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw someone else ready to ask a question. Maybe 2 people, 3 people.
Hi, thank you to all the panelists. I'm Marie Butcher, and I teach here at the Institute. I wanted to comment on the importance of changing the narrative, which was a thread that kind of ran through all of the talks. this sense of urgency to find some tangible solutions, maybe the congressional legislation, like finding specific things that the congressional legislation to have Congress approve anything before any attack could be initiated. David's suggestion of a media campaign. I think people are very hungry for tangible solutions, and in my class currently we're talking about North Korea, and we had another student group speaking about the Liberty in North Korea group, and we had the chance to speak with a North Korean refugee in person. So seeing the human face of the situation of the North Korean individual who survived and a couple of attempts to flee and then became a refugee and now is living in the States, how then he has humanized the problem instead of it getting lost in the rhetoric and the media, the way the media presents the North Korea situation. So I'm wondering, from people who are informed, as you all are, what would be the things you would want to send to policymakers, to Congressman Panetta, to all of our representatives? What would be specific messages you would like to send, and then you would like members of the audience to support and endorse, that would help make those shifts in how we think about the problem, and how legislation can be initiated so that we can do something in a more immediate fashion? Thank you.
Jackie, could you address that?
Yeah, I don't think we can. I think you're skipping a big step there. In the absence of a social movement, we don't have any power to change Congress. That's part of the problem, is that sort of since the end of the Cold War and now, the numbers of people, the people power has diminished, and so you have sort of this reduction to send a postcard to your member of Congress, and there just aren't enough of us, and we really need to rebuild a movement. And so for those people that you're talking about who are informed and who want to do things, I think the most important thing they can do is public education. That could be on a very small scale, house parties, teach-ins, peer-to-peer sort of stuff, the international peer-to-peer, putting a human face on it's incredibly important, not just with North Korea, with Russians, with Chinese, and so on. But I think that unless we kind of rebuild a movement from the bottom up, and it can't be single issue. It cannot be single issue. We cannot win this as a single issue, because it's not a single issue. It's intertwined in every way. Of course, we don't have champions in Congress, basically. I mentioned this one bill because it's getting some attention and has attracted more co-sponsors than would have been expected. But I think that we need to sort of rethink our strategy and think about how to become, much more powerful.
Okay, we have a little time left. Were there other people ready over here to ask questions? You've been sitting there close, so why don't you go first, and then Hebert, and then we'll conclude.
Hi, my name is Cecilia, and I'm a non-proliferation and terrorism studies. I'm here just based on huge interest, and I'm just expressing my appreciation to this discussion. And as a outsider, my question would be, how do you think that the discussion and the narratives of the non-proliferation has become too specialized or too difficult in the language for the public to understand? Public meaning me, examples like me. And also, if yes, how would you suggest to change it? And also, to what extent would you like this issue to raise a sense of urgency, but not causing public panic? Yeah.
Sounds like that's
and I'm speaking as an international student from Hong Kong. Thank you.
Sounds like that's for Leslie or Masako to take on.
I guess I can start. I think to some degree what you're saying about the you know, the topic becoming too specialized. I think that is very accurate. That's a good observation, and I think that's why like panels like this, you know, open to the community, more events like this and trying to get more people in here is something that can help improve that situation. I guess I want to return back to the previous question as well, what we can do specifically to move forward like right now with our government, like what message can we send? One is to get them to support the nuclear deal with Iran and stop Trump from, the recent news is that he's going to decertify the agreement, so which could essentially blow the whole thing up and give Iran the opportunity to develop nuclear weapons, which is just going to make the whole situation even worse, particularly in the Middle East where this issue has been dividing the region for a long time.
Okay, Hebert, and
I'm
was there
Hebert.
anyone else or not? Oh, one moment, and then our last
Just one
question.
thing, I want to endorse what Leslie just said to you about Iran. That is the thing right now. In terms of, I think it has become way too complicated. You don't need to be an expert to know that nuclear weapons are unacceptable and incompatible with life on planet Earth. That's the main talking point. Second thing is, because I've heard it so many times here, I want to just gently suggest that you ponder the difference between non-proliferation and disarmament, because non-proliferation has been used a lot. They don't mean the same thing. Non-proliferation means stopping the spread of nuclear weapons to more countries. It doesn't really talk to us. Disarmament means eliminating nuclear weapons. So be aware of that distinction.
Okay,
Hebert?
I'm Hebert Olson, and I think Leslie had the answer. She said the two sides were talking at each other. No listeners were mentioned. So the question is, even in a marriage, how do you get along if both partners are only talking at each other and never listening to the other? And that might solve a lot of problems, including not only nuclear weapons.
Okay, does anyone want to take that on? How do you get people that are talking past each other to listen to each other?
If,
Okay?
yeah, I don't know if there's an answer to that question, but I think, again, having sessions like this is so crucial. The education aspects, I think that's really the only solution. It's a long-term solution. You're not going to see immediate effects. And you know, maybe one thing that could push them together would be some sort of catastrophe. You know, whether it's an accident or, you know, North Korea launching, you know, a nuclear weapon, like the use of it. We want to avoid that being the catalyst for change. So I guess the more you talk about it, the better.
One thing I thought of as we had this discussion during the program is that it seems that we need something more than Americans organizing to talk to the American government, which can easily say, well, we can't eliminate nuclear weapons when all of our adversaries have them, our major adversaries, and even Russians talking to the Russian government or Chinese people talking to the Chinese government. It seems we need to have some kind of a global group talking to all these governments and saying from the people of the world, we need all of you to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons, because just doing it on a country-by-country basis, I don't see that it's going to make progress unless it's similarly happening in the other countries. So with that, I would like to thank especially all of our panelists for their participation. I would like to thank all of the volunteers, and particularly Judy Karras of WILF, that was the main organizer of this panel. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming and staying through the program. There's a lovely reception waiting for you in the lobby. You can congratulate and ask more questions and discuss with any of the panelists and with each other. And other than that, I'll just say good evening. Thank you.
much for